All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. It's great to see so many faces, familiar and new, out there in the crowd. My name is Narain Talpragada. I'm one of the organizers on staff here in Manchester, and I appreciate it. And before we hear Pete speak, and I know we're all really excited to hear from him, I wanted to share a few words on why I'm here for Pete and how all of us together can make sure that Pete is our next president. So I grew up in a conservative town in Virginia where everyone watched Fox News, and there weren't a lot of families like mine. So sometimes it was hard for us to fit in, and in fact, we differed from our neighbors in every way imaginable. But whenever we had our times of need, we always rallied together. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer, our neighbors stepped up to help out. And in that moment, party labels did not matter, but our shared values did. And Pete gets that. Last May, I saw him take the stage at a Fox News town hall and get a standing ovation talking about progressive values. And in that moment, I saw a courageous leader who was bridging partisan divides with empathy and with creativity. And I saw someone who understood that communities like my hometown and like right here in Manchester are the backbone of America. So that was the moment that I resolved to do everything in my power to make sure that Pete gets elected president. And I think for a lot of us here in this room too, that was also the moment that so many people in every ward of this city and every corner of this state decided, let's go out and knock doors and make phone calls and make sure that Pete wins. So we've got 1 week now until the primary, and the future is in our hands. Literally, I want all of you to take out your phones. Take out your phones. No, really. Okay, I can see the cell phones coming out. I want you to text local to 25859. That's local to 25859. Good. You'll find out about all of the amazing opportunities to help get out the vote in your area. There's also a whole bunch of my fellow organizers here out there in the crowd, so please find one of us. And yes, they're all raising their hands right now, which is wonderful. Find one of them, find me, and let's talk about opportunities to go out, knock doors, make phone calls, and win this thing for Pete. Because together, we're going to make sure that Pete wins the nomination, but together we're going to make sure that we turn the page on our broken politics, we bring our country together, and we finally get to work on our greatest challenges as a nation. So with that, it is my great honor to introduce a true champion for New Hampshire and for our nation, Representative Annie Kuster.
Thank you, Rowan. Thank you very much. What a team. Fired up for Pete. Woo!
Oh my goodness. Hi.
Fired up, ready to go. Thank you, everybody, for turning out this morning. I'm super, super excited. I'm excited to thank the volunteers across Iowa, the Women for Pete, the Introverts for Pete, all the different groups that turned out. We had folks working every single caucus, and I'm sure when the results are all in, we are going to have a fantastic result. But today starts the first in the nation New Hampshire presidential primary, and we are right here with Pete Buttigieg, and I'm super excited that he came to Manchester to kick this off. So here's where we are. I had the unique opportunity to meet almost all of the candidates, to get a chance to go out and campaign with them and see how they reacted to New Hampshire and how New Hampshire audiences reacted to them. And here's what was special about Pete from the very beginning. The first time I met him, we were in a bookstore in Concord, New Hampshire on Main Street called Gibson's. I can remember because Pete climbed up on a bench and the crowd was so big he could barely see to the other end of the bookstore. But what he talked about was his vision for the future. And he talked about his values. He talked about integrity. He talked about decency. He talked about everything that made him tick. And this is a man who chose to go to the military, who chose to serve our country and protect our people. This is a man who can speak about his faith clearly and with compassion and with conviction. And this is a man who has lived a life of integrity. He has energy, he has a vision for the future. I'm super, super excited about it. Then I had the chance to campaign with him when he was talking about healthcare. And he sees a vision for the future of America where every person, no matter who you are, where you live, every person has access to high-quality, affordable health care. He has a vision for America about a place where every family can breathe the air and drink the water, and we can combat climate change and end carbon pollution. But most importantly for me, he has a vision about America, of our future together, where everyone, no matter who you are, where you live, or who you love, everyone can have a bright future and a slice of the American dream. I am super excited to be with him today. I'm going to be with him all next weekend. You're going to be knocking on doors. We're going to be making phone calls. And next Tuesday night, New Hampshire is going to show us the next president of the United States. Please welcome Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Custer, for your leadership. If we had more like her in Washington, D.C., this whole country would be a better place. You are lucky to have her representing you in New Hampshire. And I'm so glad to be with you this morning. I think it's morning. We took a little nap somewhere in between sundown and sunup, and now we are excited to be with you as we enter in the week that will lead to a historic moment on Tuesday night in the New Hampshire primary, with your help. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks very much. And thanks to everybody here who served. And thanks to everybody here who came into this room knowing just how much is at stake in the decision that is going to be made here in New Hampshire in a week. And if there's one thing I've learned from being on the ground in these early states that have such an important role, such a thumb on the scale and a decisive approach to making sure that, that we get on the right track, not only for the nomination, but for the presidency and therefore for the country. It's just how seriously you all take that. And so I'm here not only to thank our supporters in this community and across New Hampshire, but also knowing that some folks are here who are still thinking it through. The same people who were coming to the events over the summer when I was just trying to get known, trying to explain how to say my name. There's still quite a bit of that going on, but the ballot's multiple choice, so no spelling test on that. And then starting to say things like, that was a pretty good speech, you're in my top 6 now. And now here we are at decision time. And so I'm here one more time to ask for your vote as we pull into these critical days in the name of the future that we can create together. And as you may know, the guiding image of this campaign that guides the work that we're doing and our approach to governing and to winning an election is an image that I want to invite you to form with me right now in your own mind in as much detail as you can. It's how it's going to feel the first time that the sun comes up over New Hampshire and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Are we ready for that day to come? Now, if there's one thing I have seen in my conversations with voters about what's at stake, it's that that is no longer even a partisan statement. That not only are diehard Democrats eager and working to bring about that day, but independents here in a state that likes to make its own decisions are also ready to make sure that day comes. And we're encountering a lot of what I like to call future former Republicans who are more than welcome in this coalition to help make sure that we can bring that day about. Because you don't have to be a diehard Democrat to look at what's going on the floor of the Senate right now and ask if there is any accountability for a president who thinks he's above the law. You don't have to be a diehard Democrat to find it hard to look your children in the eye and explain this presidency to them. And so right now, we are building a coalition that is calling out to everybody, progressives, moderates, independents, and forward-thinking Republicans, to bring about that better day. And the great news is that's what we need in order to win, and that's what we're going to need in order to lead. In order to govern, we're going to have a focus on the future. Think about what it's really going to be like on that day that I just invited you to picture with me. We'll be glad to put the chaos behind us and the corruption behind us, but it's not as though our challenges will end. Oh, our work will begin on that day. And the challenges facing the next American president are going to be profoundly new. Here at home, we're dealing with an economy reshaped by technology, changed by things like gig work that didn't even exist in its current form just a few years ago. Meanwhile, the climate crisis has leapt off of the pages of the science books and into reality and is impacting communities in every part of the country. And overseas, we're seeing not just the kind of conventional military threats that I trained to deal with when I was in uniform, but global health security challenges like what's happening in China, cybersecurity and election security threats to the United States that were not thought of just a few years or decades ago. And so, more than ever, we are going to need a president ready to look to the future. And that also happens to be how we win. Every time my party has earned the White House in the last half century, every single time that we've won, we have had a candidate who was focused on the future, hadn't been in Washington very long, if at all, and was opening the door to a new generation of American leadership. And I believe that's what we need in order to win and in order to govern this country. Also, in order to win and in order to govern, in order to deliver the bold changes that we know this country needs, we've got to invite as many people as possible into this tent. This is not a time for my way or the highway politics. This is not a time to say to somebody, because you don't agree with me on 100% of everything, you don't belong at my side at all. This is our top opportunity to add, to expand, to multiply the power of an American majority that not only can agree on what we're against and wanting to put an end to this president, but even more powerfully agrees on what it is that we're for. Way more than you would see represented on the floor of Capitol Hill. Think about it. Most Americans know that the time has come to put an end of the season in which giant corporations can pay zero on billions of dollars in profit while wages are flat. Most Americans recognize that we've got to act on climate change right now, and that it is not just a scientific issue, but a moral issue. Most Americans are ready to see work rewarded, reward both efforts to organize and the work that happens every day, and begin to recognize that, for example, if you are a family caregiver taking care of a loved one, that is work and ought to be recognized too. Most Americans, like the guy I met in Berlin who came up to me saying that he had been at the pharmacy standing in line. The person in front of him didn't have the money to get the prescription she needed, was $5 short, and said, well, I reached down to my pocket and spotted her the $5, but what happens the next time if I'm not standing behind her in line? Understand now that the time has come to see to it that not only is there no such thing as an uninsured American, but we got to make sure there is no such thing as an unaffordable prescription for anyone, no matter your health insurance in this country. We have an American majority ready to insist that the Second Amendment can no longer be twisted into an excuse to do nothing whatsoever to protect lives from gun violence with universal background checks, red flag laws, and doing something about the assault weapons that are so dangerous in this country. Most of us recognize that a democracy is not a democracy if money can outvote people, or if districts can be drawn by politicians picking out their voters rather than the other way around. Most Americans recognize it to be a true democracy. And I don't have to tell anybody here in the home state of Granny D this, that we got to act to make sure that every vote is counted and that every voter counts. And we know, as a country, how much depends on taking the steps now, in our time, to see to it that your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth or your life expectancy or your relationship with law enforcement. We got to act now to make that a reality. Most Americans understand that in a state that says live free or die, we can build up an understanding of American freedom that supports people's freedom to live a life of their choosing and freedom from the wrong kind of interference in their lives. Like the need to keep government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be. And most Americans, whether you think of yourself as part of a political party or not, support our teachers and are ready to back them up with a Secretary of Education who believes in public education. So you see, on these and so many other critical issues, we already know what we've got to do as a country. And we know what's at stake because these aren't theoretical issues. These are our lives. Our lives will go differently depending who the next president of the United States is. The decisions that are made in big white buildings in Washington, D.C. find their way into our families, into our homes, into our workplaces, even into our marriages. That's what's at stake right now. And everywhere I go, I am encountering the faces of those who reflect the problems that we face and the solutions that we carry as an American people. We just got to make sure we actually get this done. We got to make sure that we put together the coalition that can bring an end to this presidency, that can launch the era that has to begin on that next day, and that understands what the presidency is for. So I am running for this office, asking for your vote for this office, not because it is an office that I decided one day that I would like to occupy, but because the presidency has a purpose. And the purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president. It is the unification and the empowerment of the American people to get these big things done. Now, as you know, our campaign prides itself on conversation, on openness, on transparency, and that means that even though our numbers have grown a little bit from when I was first poking my head into the coffee shops of New Hampshire, we can still have a conversation. So we've gathered up questions, and I'm going to ask you to welcome back to the stage Naran from our campaign, who is going to lead the discussion and share some of the questions that came from everybody. Welcome. By the way, thank you also for adopting our organizers as your own and treating them so well. Don't we have the best campaign staff in the state? I know I'm biased, but...
Okay, so the first question. So someone here says, as a fiscal conservative, I've been abandoned by my party. What's your position on our debt and deficit spending, given current projections that debt will overtake GDP in the foreseeable future?
Great question. If it's you, go ahead and give a wave if you like, so I'm looking in the right direction. Hi. Thanks for coming. You're right. I'm the youngest one running for president, and I'm old enough to remember when congressional Republicans cared about the debt, or at least said they did. And here we are with $1 trillion deficit under this president, and it shows no sign of slowing down. Now, I think the time has come for us to take ownership of this issue. And it's also a question of generational justice, because a future generation, perhaps my generation actually, will be here when some of these time bombs go off if we don't get on top of our fiscal situation. Now, here's the good news. Contrary to what we have sometimes been told, especially when the debt is invoked as an excuse to stop investing in things like infrastructure and education and health, the truth is we can absolutely get on top of this if we're willing to do two things. And you'll see my campaign does both of these things. The first is to be smart and honest and careful about what it is we promise and propose to do. So you'll notice I have proposed a way to make sure that there's no such thing as an uninsured American. We call it Medicare for all who want it, without assuming that everyone's going to want it. We allow people to decide for themselves. And we've structured it in such a way that it can be done over the course of the next decade for about $1.5 trillion. Not a small amount of money. But when you compare it to the price tags of 20 or 30 or 40 trillion, or some candidates saying you don't deserve an explanation on how much it's going to cost at all. This is the way to make sure that we can get that big thing done and do it without breaking the bank. Same thing on college affordability. I believe passionately that we must make sure that cost is no longer a barrier to going to college. And that's why we've put together a program that would design a state-federal partnership to make college support so generous it'd actually be tuition-free for most Americans. But if you're in that top income bracket, I still support you and wish you well, but we're going to need you to pay your own tuition because those taxpayer dollars are scarce and we need to use them in the wisest possible ways. So that's step one, be smart about what we're spending. Step two is not be afraid to talk revenue. And I'm not saying we got to go back to the Eisenhower years of tax rates approaching 90% in some income brackets, but let's face it, some folks are not paying their share right now. I mean, for Amazon or Chevron to pay zero, they made billions of dollars in profits and paid less in taxes than you and I did last year. Not just in percentage, but in dollars. Some of them had negative tax rates. I don't even know how that works. We have got to make sure that whether it's those corporations or whether it's individuals, anybody who has an army of accountants and lawyers to park their profits where they don't get taxed, that we update the tax code, hold corporations accountable, improve our enforcement, have reasonable rates on those highest income brackets. And if we do that, every single thing that I've proposed we do in this campaign, all of our investments from infrastructure to health, are more than paid for, so that the sum total of every campaign promise I've made on net is that the deficit will start to go down. Thanks for the question.
What would you do differently about the war on drugs?
Whole lot of things. And again, if that's your question, just give a wave or a shout. Thought I heard you. Oh, look. So one thing we know is that the war on drugs approach has completely failed. In particular, the reliance on incarceration. Look, if incarceration made a country safe, we'd be the safest country in the world because we're the most incarcerated. And it's just not true. Not only that, but the patterns of mass incarceration have had terrible racial inequities and in particular been incredibly destructive to Black American families. And so the time has come to have a new approach. What does that look like? It means decarcerating this country. It means reducing by half the number of people who are incarcerated with federal leadership, but knowing that states have to act too. It means ending incarceration as a response to possession of drugs. Because we have seen in my own community the number of times and cases where incarceration winds up doing more harm than the offense it was intended to deal with. Things like children growing up without a parent. And I believe the time has come to legalize marijuana. And when we do, we should do it in a way that is retroactive to deal with some of these harms that were done in the past. Now, that's not to say that we don't care about the public health harms of substance use and addiction, especially seeing what's going on in cases like the opioid epidemic. But I think the opioid epidemic has also demonstrated our awareness that this is not a moral issue as much as it is a medical issue. That's what addiction is. And we ought to face up to it. So both looking forward when it comes to opioids and responding, it would be shame on us if we're only enlightened now looking forward when it comes to opioids and do nothing to reverse the harms of the way that crack and marijuana were handled in the past. Let's make sure that in all cases we recognize the common sense science-based approaches we should have for the road ahead. And then when it comes to what we are up against with opioids, make sure doctors are actually able to prescribe an adequate amount of medication-assisted treatment. And the other thing that I think is so important as we tackle our broader mental health challenges as a country is to understand that there is a crisis of belonging in this country that helps to explain what some people are medicating for at the beginning of what turns into an addiction issue. And responding to that crisis of belonging starts all the way at the top with the tone set from the Oval Office.
So, in addition to, let's see, what is this? Yes, so this is a question about Alzheimer's. Basically, what will you do about treatment for Alzheimer's, and how will you support millennials and Gen Z with this upcoming public health crisis?
All right. Well, thank you for your advocacy on Alzheimer's. It's touched people that I care about, and it's an exceptionally cruel disease. And so, first of all, we need to make sure that we are upping our support for research, because I truly believe in this idea that the first survivor of Alzheimer's is living among us today. And we got to make that a reality. The next thing we've got to do is support a structure that allows people and families who are impacted by this cruel disease to get by. It's one of the reasons, of course, why we need to make sure everybody has insurance. It's also why, whether we're talking about Alzheimer's, dementia, and memory care, or aging in general, we have got to deal with long-term care solutions in this country. I remember, not related to Alzheimer's, but another medical issue, when it appeared for a time that my father was going to need long-term care when he became ill. And I will never forget the conversation we had at the hospital with my mother, me, and the social worker, politely explaining why the best answer for the family might be to just spend down everything she's got until all her assets are gone so she can qualify for Medicaid. And I'm seeing heads nodding like we're not the only family to have had that conversation. And so I may not be the only one to have shaken my head and thought, is that how we handle long-term care in this country? And for so many people, that turns out to be the answer they get. And of course, this is especially acute for families impacted by dementia and by Alzheimer's. So some steps we need to take. First of all, a national long-term care benefit, $90 a day. It may not cover everything, but it will make a dramatic difference, both in access to the specialized units that people need and being in the facility, and where possible, making it possible for people to stay at home longer too. Whatever is medically right. These decisions should be based on what's right for the family and what is right medically, not on the financial twists and turns of the insurance industry. And one more thing. Since so often it does fall to a family member to provide that family caregiving I was talking about earlier, let me explain what I mean when I say we need to lift up and honor that work. I believe that for the purposes of Social Security, a year spent as a family caregiver, looking after a dependent, whether it's a parent or someone else in the family, should count as a year in the workforce, because even though it's not compensated, it most certainly is work, and we ought to treat it as such.
How will you hold the drug industry accountable for high drug prices?
Mm-hmm. Got some thoughts on this. So, look, it would be one thing if we had some issue where an important drug relied on some ingredient that was subjected to a rare and bizarre shortage and prices went up. That's not what we are seeing in most of these cases where you've got what amounts to gouging. And often we're talking about prices exploding on things that people need in order to live. You look at what's happening with insulin. You look at what happened with EpiPens, so many cases. And we're seeing companies do this not because they have to, but because they can. And the fact that they can, well, that's up to decisions that are made in Washington. So we got to make different and better decisions. Let's start with a no-brainer. At least I think it's a no-brainer. And it's actually a portion of how we're going to fund the health care plan that I'm proposing too, talking of fiscal responsibility. It is the common sense step of allowing Medicare to negotiate prices with drug companies. One more example of something that most Americans, I think in both parties, understand we've got to do and can't seem to get it through Washington because our democracy has gotten so warped. That's not the only thing. I believe we need a direct guardrail, an ability to control escalation of prices above the rate of inflation. And that when that happens, we can enforce with a tax penalty that changes companies' behavior and makes it not worth their while to engage in that kind of price gouging. By the way, all of this is compatible with innovation. I'm fine with companies doing well when they create marvelous things, although we should also remember the role of publicly funded research in making those innovations possible. And so we'll continue to support innovation, but we've got to have some common sense here. The last thing I'll mention is that I'm proposing, through our plan, that there be a cap, all the way down to zero, depending on your income, but never more than $250 a month out of pocket. And the reason I say it ought to be monthly, and almost to my own surprise, I think I'm the only candidate talking about this, is that most of us don't experience the economy on a yearly basis. And yet a lot of folks are in the position of having to delay getting a prescription filled, not based on what makes sense for them medically, but because of the month in which the cap that their insurance provides actually kicks in, right? Makes no sense. And so it ought to be a monthly cap so that there can be some comfort, some peace of mind, and some consistency for families that, you know, our bills come in once a month, not once a year, most of us. And that ought to be the structure of how we set an out-of-pocket cap. If we take steps like that, we will continue to have marvelous therapies developed, but we will not continue to have this situation where people are forced to choose between groceries or rent and prescription drugs. This country should never accept that being a reality, not in the United States of America.
Okay, so the question is, aside from what the president has said about headaches after the airstrike by Iran in Iraq, there was no military response, should there have been?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with that comment that the president made. You know, patriotism isn't about beating your chest. It's not about being the national equivalent of the loudmouth guy at the end of the bar talking how tough he is. Strength is different from that. Strength is about knowing when you must use force and avoiding that whenever you can. Think about it. The toughest, strongest person you know is probably not the first to swing a fist. And so some level of balance and, in this case, readiness for de-escalation is critical to keep us safe. Now, it is certainly the case that Iran's behavior has been provocative, that we will need to contend with continued proxy fighting and all kinds of malignant activities in the region. But there is no evidence that that strike made us safer. And lots of evidence that we are going down this path because of a decision that never should have been made in the first place, which is withdrawing the United States from a deal that was keeping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Let me share a story with you that got me thinking all over again about what's at stake and having a commander-in-chief who actually understands the perspective of those who served. I was in the airport a few weeks ago traveling for the campaign and ran into somebody I had not seen since we were both in Afghanistan. Not seen since we were both serving together, and hadn't seen since she was injured in an insider attack during the time we were both deployed out there. And I saw her coming down the concourse. She's with her teenage son at her side. And she's wearing a t-shirt from the Wounded Warrior Project that says, "Some assembly required." And I asked her how she was doing. She lifted up her knee and she tapped on her leg, her prosthetic leg, the part they couldn't save. And she said, "The Navy fixed me up just fine." And then she let me know she's looking forward to her next deployment. Because the people who put on the uniform of this country will do whatever is required of them by the United States of America. That's why they deserve a president who will never ask them to go into harm's way if it can be avoided, and who knows to take care of our troops both during and after their time in uniform.
This is the last question.
All right.
Let's see.
Yeah. Well, Ma'am, I don't regard you as a threat. I regard you as somebody who has shared a lot with this country, as everybody who served and everybody who loves everybody who served is. And our veterans deserve better than what we're getting from this president. So thank you.
Yep. And the last question is, can you speak more basically about the difference between undergrad college debt and grad college debt and how your programs address this?
Interesting. Yeah, so our focus is on debt for four-year university education, but we also have to make sure that we are keeping the cost of graduate school under control. Now, the theory is supposed to be that when you're in grad school, if you are taking on debt, it is toward the furtherance of a career that's also going to pay well. That's the theory. I happen to be living in a household where, because I'm married to a teacher, who I'm so proud that he is a teacher, and who went through grad school in order to qualify to be a teacher, but made more actually working odd jobs to put himself through grad school than he did as a teacher, is an example of many areas in which professional compensation is out of whack, and we got to make sure that grad school is more affordable on the front end. So investing and supporting in our universities, in our university system, and in state-federal partnerships to keep costs under control is part of how we make sure there is less debt to begin with. The other thing we got to do is make sure that fields like public service and fields that aren't going to compensate as richly as others are rewarded. That's why I'm proposing that we expand the public service loan forgiveness program. And this would work with graduate as well as undergraduate student debt. And if you're familiar with this, it's a great idea that's already on the books. It says that if you take on a role in public service, you can get your debt forgiven. Problem is, it's almost impossible to actually take advantage of. It takes 10 years before you get any benefit at all. Most loans don't qualify, and it's too narrow in terms of what counts as public service. For example, I would argue, if you are providing medical care or mental health support in particular in a rural area that is underserved, whether you're working for the public sector or not, that is public service, and it's the sort of thing that ought to get loan forgiveness. So we need to make sure that we are focusing on that kind of support so people can pursue meaningful careers and can afford to serve. And also, let's definitely make sure that the next generation of teachers can actually afford to become teachers and practice their craft and support them when they do. All right. One more thank you to Narain for being your voice today and such a great face for the campaign. Thank you.
Our next president.
Well, let me just close with one more thought, and it's to make the case for the idea of hope, which I know went out of style for a while in our political vocabulary, and I understand why, because we're in a bleak and divided moment. I mean, just look at the news. I live and breathe politics, and I'm exhausted by watching the news out of Washington right now. It's almost as though it's designed to make you want to turn it off and walk away. Of course, if we do that, that's when the cynics win. And one of the things I admire about New Hampshire is the way in which there is a culture here of participation, a culture of ownership, whether it's in all the different ways that people seek and hold elected office here, or the tradition of the town meeting and the town hall. There's a sense that if something needs to be changed in your community, in your state, you personally have something to do with being responsible for fixing it. And we need more than ever that spirit when it comes to our national politics. Now, the hope that propelled me into this campaign is vindicated every day. It was vindicated in a big way last night when we had a chance to quiet those questions of whether we belonged in this effort in the first place. Building a coalition across so many different communities and types of counties and voters that saw the need for change. But now so much will depend on what the famously independent thinking state of New Hampshire decides 1 week from today. And what I am asking of you is to take whatever sense of hope must have propelled you in this room, because I don't think you'd be here if you didn't have some belief that it actually matters who gets their hands on the mechanics and the pulleys and levers of government and what values are guiding those hands. What I'm asking you to do is bottle up that sense of hope that brought you here and spread it to those in your life who may well respond much more powerfully to a word from you than to an ad from anybody else. And let them know why you think this matters, and let them know why you see a way forward in this coalition that we're building. And above all, let them know they are welcome to join us in this effort. If we do that, we will send next week the most powerful reply of all to all the nonsense that's going on the floor of the Senate, at the hands of the Senate GOP. Because remember, as discouraging as it may be that they are the jury today, we are the jury tomorrow, and this year we get to send a whole different message. So I hope I can look to you to support us in this effort. I thank you for your involvement, for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for caring. I'm asking for your vote one more time, and I'll see you on primary night.